I sat on the cold wooden bench outside the Willowbrook Public Library, watching my breath form small clouds in the November air, and wondered if they had simply forgotten I existed. The library had closed 40 minutes ago. The last librarian, a kind woman with silver-streaked hair, had asked me twice if someone was coming. I had smiled both times and told her yes. Any minute now. My mother was just running late. She had nodded with that particular expression adults wear when they know a child is lying but lack the authority to intervene. Then she had locked the heavy oak doors, climbed into her sedan and driven away, leaving me alone in the gathering darkness. I was 12 years old. My younger sister, Vivian, was 10, and somewhere across town my family was celebrating her Playdate with the Thornton twins, a social event my mother had deemed essential to Vivian's development and happiness. The Thorntons were wealthy, connected, and their approval meant everything to my mother's aspirations for our family's social standing. I had asked to come along, just once. I had stood in the kitchen that morning, my library books clutched to my chest, and suggested that perhaps I could meet the Thornton girls too. My mother had looked at me as if I had proposed something absurd, something embarrassing. "Helena, don't be ridiculous," she had said, not even pausing in her preparation of the elaborate snacks she was bringing. "This is Vivian's event. You'll only make things awkward. Besides, you wanted to go to the library, didn't you? Your father will drop you off and pick you up. It's all arranged." It was not all arranged. My father had dropped me off at 9 a.m. with a distracted wave, his mind already on the golf game he was meeting friends for. He had not mentioned when he would return. I had assumed, foolishly, that my mother would remember. That someone would remember. The temperature was dropping. I had worn only a thin cardigan over my dress, because my mother had taken my winter coat from the closet that morning, declaring that Vivian needed it more. Vivian's coat had a small stain on the sleeve, invisible to anyone but my mother's exacting eye, and that imperfection was unacceptable for the Thornton Playdate. So Vivian wore my coat, the new one my grandmother had sent for my birthday, and I wore nothing warm at all. I pulled my cardigan tighter and tried not to cry. The library was 7 miles from our house. I had walked home from school before, but school was only 2 miles away, and I had always done it in daylight, in fair weather, with the knowledge that someone expected me at the other end. Now the streetlights were flickering on, casting pools of orange light that seemed more threatening than comforting. I did not know the route from the library. I did not have money for a bus. I did not have a phone. I had tried the payphone outside the library entrance, feeding it the single quarter I had found in my pocket. Mother's phone had rung and rung before going to voicemail. I had left a message, my voice small and careful, explaining that the library was closed and I was waiting outside and could someone please come. Then I had sat down on the bench and waited. That had been an hour ago. The cold was settling into my bones now, a dull ache that made my fingers stiff and my thoughts slow. I thought about my sister, warm in my coat, laughing with the Thornton twins over whatever elaborate activities my mother had planned. I thought about my father, finishing his golf game, perhaps stopping for drinks afterward with his friends. I thought about my mother, so focused on Vivian's success, that she had simply erased me from her mental calendar, the way you might forget a dentist appointment or an overdue library book. I was an overdue library book, waiting on a shelf, hoping someone would remember to return for me. The headlights of a car turned onto the street, and for a moment my heart lifted. But the car did not slow. It swept past, illuminating me briefly in its glare, and then it was gone, leaving me in darkness that felt deeper than before. I made a decision. I stood up, my legs stiff and aching, and I began to walk. I did not know the way, but I knew the general direction of home, and I knew that sitting still was no longer an option. The cold was too deep. The darkness was too complete. And the waiting, the endless waiting for people who were not coming, had become unbearable. I walked for what felt like hours. The streets were unfamiliar, the houses strange, the occasional passing car a source of fear rather than hope. I got lost twice, finding myself in dead ends and cul-de-sacs that forced me to backtrack. My feet blistered in my school shoes. My cardigan offered no protection against the wind that had picked up, cutting through the thin fabric like it was not there at all. I was crossing a busy intersection, the walk signal counting down its final seconds, when I heard the horn. I do not remember the impact. I remember the lights, bright and blinding, and the screech of brakes, and then nothing at all. Nothing at all! In that nothing, I understood everything. I understood that I had spent 12 years of my life waiting for love that was never coming. I understood that my mother's preference for Vivian was not a temporary phase or a misunderstanding, but a fundamental truth of our family, as fixed and immovable as the stars. I understood that my father's distraction was not absence of malice, but absence of care, which was perhaps worse. I understood that I had been walking through my life, apologizing for my own existence, shrinking myself smaller and smaller to avoid taking up space that my family had already allocated to someone else. I understood that I was tired, so deeply, profoundly tired. And then, in the darkness, I felt something shift. A door opening, a light, warm and golden, that seemed to come from inside me rather than from any external source. I felt myself falling, but it was not a frightening fall. It was the kind of fall you experience in dreams, weightless and inevitable, carrying you somewhere new. I opened my eyes. I was lying in my bed, my childhood bed, with the faded purple comforter my grandmother had quilted for me and the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a rabbit. Morning light streamed through the curtains, the particular golden quality of autumn sunlight that I remembered from a very specific time in my life. The air smelled like coffee and toast and my mother's perfume, that expensive floral scent she only wore on special occasions. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding. On my desk sat a library book, its due date stamped clearly on the slip inside the cover. November 14th. The day I had been left at the library. The day I had died. I looked at my hands. They were small, unblemished, the hands of a 12-year-old girl. I touched my face, felt the soft roundness of my cheeks, the absence of the small scar I had gotten above my eyebrow in high school. I had been given a second chance. For a long moment, I simply sat there, breathing. The memories of my first life were clear and sharp, undimmed by the passage through death and rebirth. I remembered everything: the library, the cold, the walking, the lights, the nothing. But more than that, I remembered the years that had come before. The years of trying, the years of hoping, the years of believing that if I were just good enough, quiet enough, accomplished enough, my family would finally see me. They never had. And in my first life, I had never stopped trying. Now, sitting in my childhood bedroom with the morning light warming my face, I made a different choice. I would not try anymore. I would not wait anymore. I would not shrink myself or apologize for my existence or accept crumbs of affection and pretend they were a feast. I had died alone in the dark, and I had been given a miracle, and I would not waste it on people who had already proven, conclusively and repeatedly, that I did not matter to them. I got out of bed and walked to my closet. My winter coat hung there, the beautiful one my grandmother had made, with its soft wool and careful stitching. Today, in my first life, my mother had taken it for Vivian. I had let her, standing silent and compliant while she stripped it from its hanger and declared it necessary for the Playdate. I took the coat from the closet and put it on. Then I locked my bedroom door. "Helena!" My mother's voice floated up the stairs. "Come down for breakfast. We need to leave soon." I did not answer. I sat at my desk and opened the library book, a collection of Greek myths I had been halfway through when I died. I found my place and began to read. The footsteps on the stairs were quick and impatient. The knock on my door was perfunctory, more announcement than request. "Helena, open this door. Your father needs to take you to the library before he meets his friends." I turned a page. "I'm not going to the library today." A pause. Then the doorknob rattled. "Helena, stop being difficult. Open this door right now." "No." The word hung in the air between us, solid and immovable. I had never said no to my mother before. Not like this. Not without explanation or apology or the desperate hope that compliance would earn me something in return. "Excuse me?" I closed my book and stood. I walked to the door but did not unlock it. When I spoke, my voice was calm and quiet, and I marvelled at how steady it sounded. I said no, I'm not going to the library. I'm not going anywhere today. I'm going to stay in my room and read. "Helena, this is absurd. Open this door immediately." "You're going to the Thornton Playdate with Vivian. You've been planning it for weeks. You don't need me for that, and you weren't going to pick me up from the library anyway, so I'm saving everyone the trouble." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear my mother recalculating, trying to understand this new variable in an equation she thought she had solved. "What do you mean we weren't going to pick you up?" "I mean exactly what I said. You were going to forget. Dad was going to forget. I was going to sit outside the library in the cold for hours, and then I was going to walk home alone in the dark, and no one was going to notice or care." "That's ridiculous. We would never." "You would. You have. You will, if I let you." I pressed my palm flat against the door, feeling the cool wood beneath my skin. "But I'm not going to let you. Not anymore." I heard my mother's breathing, quick and shallow. I heard her heels click against the hardwood floor as she shifted her weight. And then I heard something I'd never heard before. Uncertainty. "Helena, I don't know what's gotten into you, but we'll discuss this later. Right now. Right now, you need to leave for the playdate. Vivian is waiting. The Thorntons are expecting you. Go." She went. I heard her descend the stairs, her steps slower than before. I heard her voice too quiet to make out the words, speaking to my father. I heard the front door open and close, and then I heard the car pull out of the driveway, carrying my family away to their important social engagement, leaving me alone in the house. I unlocked my door, walked downstairs, and made myself breakfast. The day passed slowly, peacefully. I read my book. I made lunch. I found an old puzzle in the hall closet and spread it out on the dining room table, working on it in the afternoon light. I did not think about my family, or the playdate, or the Thorntons. I did not wonder what they were doing or whether they were happy. I simply existed, alone and content, in a house that had never felt like home. They returned in the early evening, the front door bursting open with the particular energy my mother always had after a successful social event. Vivian's voice, high and excited, described every detail of the playdate, the games they had played, the food they had eaten, the promises extracted for future visits. My father's murmur of agreement provided a steady baseline to the melody of my mother's enthusiastic responses. No one called for me. No one came to find me. I continued working on my puzzle, fitting a piece of sky into place with quiet satisfaction. Eventually, my mother appeared in the doorway of the dining room. She stood there for a moment watching me, her expression complicated. "We brought you dinner," she said finally, "from the Italian place on 5th Street. "Thank you." I did not look up. I heard her set the takeout container on the table, heard her hesitate, heard her turn and walk away. The food sat untouched beside me as I found the next piece of the puzzle, then the next, then the next. That night, in my bed, I stared at the water stain on the ceiling and thought about what came next. In my first life, this day had been a turning point. though I had not recognised it at the time. The Playdate had been a success. My mother had decided that nurturing Vivian's friendship with the Thornton twins was essential. More Playdates had followed, more events, more opportunities, more investments of time and attention and resources. Vivian had flourished in the warmth of that attention, growing into a confident, socially adept young woman who never questioned her place in our family, and I had continued to fade. I had become quieter, more withdrawn, more invisible. I had worked hard in school, hoping achievement would earn me the recognition affection could not. I had gotten into a good college, graduated with honours, found a respectable job. But none of it had mattered. My mother had attended Vivian's college graduation, with tears in her eyes. She had missed mine entirely, claiming a scheduling conflict she never adequately explained. My father had promised to help me move into my first apartment, and then forgotten, leaving me to carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs alone. I had died at 28, alone, and forgotten, the same way I had lived. I would not make those mistakes again. I would not chase approval that would never come. I would not waste my second chance on people who had already shown me exactly how much I meant to them. I closed my eyes and slept, deeply and without dreams. The weeks that followed established a new pattern in our household. I attended school, did my homework, ate my meals, and otherwise kept to myself. When my mother tried to engage me, whether in criticism or the occasional awkward attempt at conversation, I responded politely, briefly, and without emotion. When my father offered his usual distracted pleasantries, I accepted them at face value and expected nothing more. When Vivian tried to involve me in her activities, clearly prompted by my mother's discomfort with my new distance, I declined with a quiet firmness that allowed no argument. I was not rude. I was not hostile. I was simply absent, present in body but elsewhere in spirit, conserving my energy for things and people who deserved it. My grandmother noticed first. She called one Sunday afternoon, and I happened to answer the phone. "Helena, is that you?" "Yes, grandmother." "You sound different, older." I smiled, a small smile that no one could see. "Do I?" "You do? Is everything all right?" I thought about the question carefully before answering. "Everything is exactly as it should be." A long pause, then quietly. "I see. Well, I'm glad you answered. I was calling to let your mother know I'll be visiting next month. But perhaps we could have lunch together, just the two of us. Would you like that?" "I would like that very much." "Good. I'll arrange it." Another pause. "Helena?" "Yes?" "Whatever's happened, whatever's changing, trust yourself. You've always been stronger than they gave you credit for." My throat tightened. In my first life, my grandmother had died when I was 15, too soon to provide the steady support I had so desperately needed. I had mourned her deeply, but distantly, already so numbed by neglect that even grief had felt muted. "Thank you, grandmother. I'll see you soon, my dear." She hung up, and I stood holding the phone for a long moment, feeling something warm and unfamiliar blooming in my chest. The first real test came 3 weeks later. My mother had been watching me with increasing concern, though she expressed it as irritation rather than worry. She did not understand this new version of her older daughter, quiet, self-contained, unreachable. She preferred the old Helena, the one who tried so hard, who could be counted on to absorb whatever treatment the family dished out and ask for more. "There's a winter formal at the community centre," she announced at dinner one evening. "The Thorntons are organising it. Vivian's been invited, of course, and they've extended an invitation to you as well." I continued eating, not looking up. "That's kind of them. So you'll come?" "No." The word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. My father looked up from his plate, blinking as if he had just noticed something unusual was happening. Vivian glanced between me and my mother, her young face uncertain. Helena, this is an excellent opportunity for Vivian. It's an excellent opportunity for Vivian. I have no interest in the Thorntons or their parties. You're being deliberately difficult. I'm being honest. I finally raised my eyes to meet my mother's gaze. The Thorntons don't know me. They don't care about me. The invitation was extended as a courtesy to you, and we both know it. I would rather spend the evening doing something I actually enjoy than performing social pleasantries for people who will forget I exist the moment I leave. My mother's face had gone pale. That's an incredibly ungrateful attitude. Perhaps. I returned my attention to my dinner, but it's mine, and I'm entitled to it. The silence stretched. I could feel my mother's anger, my father's discomfort, Vivian's confusion. But underneath all of it, I felt something else. Freedom. The freedom of no longer caring what they thought. The freedom of having died once and survived it, and knowing that nothing they could say or do would ever hurt me as much as that cold November night. Fine, my mother said finally, her voice tight. Stay home then. But don't expect any sympathy when you have no friends and no social connections. I won't. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, and left the room. My father followed a moment later, murmuring something about checking on her. Vivian remained, her dinner half eaten, her eyes wide. Helena? Yes? Are you mad at me? I looked at my younger sister, really looked at her for the first time in weeks. She was just a child, I realised. A child who had been given everything and taught to expect nothing less. She was not the villain of my story. She was simply a product of the same family that had shaped me, moulded by different forces toward different ends. No, Vivian, I'm not mad at you. Then why are you being like this? I considered the question. Do you remember last month, when you went to the Thornton Playdate? Yes. Do you remember wearing my coat, the one grandmother made for me? Vivian's face flushed. Mom said you didn't mind. Mom didn't ask. She took it from my closet and gave it to you, and I was supposed to wear nothing warm at all to the library. And then, when the playdate was over, nobody remembered to pick me up. I sat outside in the cold for hours, Vivian. Nobody came. My sister's eyes had gone very wide. I didn't know. I know you didn't. That's not your fault. But it happened, and it made me realise something important. What? That I can't keep waiting for people to remember me. I have to remember myself. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, she stood and carried her plate to the kitchen. I heard water running, the clink of dishes. When she returned, she paused in the doorway. I'm sorry, Helena, about the coat, about all of it. It was the first genuine apology I had ever received from anyone in my family, in either life. I felt it settle into me, warm and unexpected, a small gift in the midst of a vast recalibration. Thank you, Vivian. She nodded and disappeared upstairs. I finished my dinner alone, and for once the solitude did not feel like punishment. The winter formal came and went. Vivian attended in a beautiful dress my mother had spent weeks selecting. My father drove her there and picked her up, both on time, both fully attentive to her needs. My mother waited up to hear every detail of the evening, her face glowing with vicarious excitement. I spent the evening with my grandmother, who had kept her promise of a private lunch and extended it into a standing weekly dinner. We talked about books, about her childhood, about the flowers she was planning to plant in her garden come spring. She never asked about my parents or my sister. She never tried to mediate or explain or excuse. She simply accepted me as I was and offered her company without conditions. It was the first real relationship I had ever had. In my first life, I had been too young to appreciate it, too desperate for my parents' approval to recognise what my grandmother was offering. Now, with the clarity of my second chance, I treasured every moment. Winter melted into spring. The rhythm of my life had settled into something sustainable, something that did not require constant vigilance against disappointment. I excelled in school without making a performance of it. I cultivated friendships with 2 girls in my class who shared my love of reading and quiet activities. I spent my free time building a life that was genuinely mine, untethered to the approval of people who had never offered it. My mother watched this transformation with barely concealed frustration. She had tried everything: guilt, criticism, bribery, manipulation, and nothing had worked. The old Helena was gone, replaced by someone she did not understand and could not control. "Your grandmother has been filling your head with ideas," she said one evening, cornering me in the kitchen. "Grandmother treats me with respect and kindness. If that's filling my head with ideas, then I suppose she has. She's turning you against your own family." "No, you did that yourself." My mother's face contorted. "How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth? Acknowledge what everyone in this house already knows?" I kept my voice calm, my posture relaxed. "You have never loved me the way you love Vivian. You have never prioritized me, supported me, or even really seen me. I spent 12 years at trying to earn something that was never available. I'm not trying anymore." "That's not." "It is, and we both know it. The difference is that I've stopped pretending otherwise." I walked past her, up the stairs to my room, and closed the door gently behind me. I did not lock it. I no longer needed to. The summer I turned 13, my grandmother invited me to spend 6 weeks with her. My mother resisted, citing various obligations and social events, but my grandmother was immovable. "Helena has been promised to me," she said during a tense phone call I happened to overhear. "You've had her for 13 years. I'm asking for 6 weeks, unless you'd like to explain to everyone why you're preventing an elderly woman from spending time with her granddaughter." My mother had no response to that. I packed my bags the next morning. Those 6 weeks were transformative. My grandmother lived in a small house by the coast, surrounded by gardens she had cultivated over decades. She taught me to grow tomatoes, to identify birds by their songs, to cook simple meals with fresh ingredients. She told me stories about her own life, her struggles, her triumphs, her regrets, with a candour that treated me as an equal rather than a child. And she told me about my mother. "Your mother was a difficult child," she said one evening, as we sat on her porch watching the sunset over the ocean. "Ambitious, competitive, always comparing herself to others. I tried to teach her that love isn't a limited resource, that caring for one child doesn't diminish what you have for another. But she never understood. She saw everything as a competition, and she was determined to win. Is that why she favours Vivian?" My grandmother was quiet for a moment. "I think she sees herself in Vivian. The charm, the social ease, the ability to make people like her. You're different, Helena, quieter, more internal. She doesn't understand you, and what she doesn't understand, she dismisses. It doesn't excuse what she's done. No, it doesn't. But it explains it, and sometimes understanding is the first step toward letting go." I thought about that for a long time. I had carried so much anger, so much hurt for so long. In my first life, that weight had never lifted. I had died still bearing it. But here, now, with the salt air on my skin and my grandmother's steady presence beside me, I felt something shift. "I don't want to be angry anymore," I said quietly, "but I don't know how to stop." My grandmother reached over and took my hand. "You don't have to forgive them, Helena. Forgiveness isn't a debt you owe to people who hurt you, but you can release them. You can decide that they no longer have power over your happiness. You can build a life that doesn't depend on their approval or their love. I've been trying to do that. I know, and you're succeeding. The girl who arrived here 6 weeks ago was still fighting. The girl sitting beside me now has found something like peace. I leaned my head against her shoulder, feeling the fragility of her bones beneath my cheek. I don't want to lose you, grandmother. You won't, not really. The people we love leave pieces of themselves in us. No matter what happens, you'll carry me with you always. Tears slipped down my face, but I did not wipe them away. For once, I let myself feel without trying to control or suppress. My grandmother held me, and the ocean whispered against the shore, and the world felt, for a moment, entirely whole. I returned home at the end of summer, transformed in ways my family could sense but not name. Something had settled in me, some final piece clicking into place. I no longer felt the need to defend my boundaries or explain my choices. I simply lived them quietly and consistently and let the consequences unfold as they would. The years passed, high school arrived with its particular pressures, and I navigated them with the calm competence I had cultivated. I maintained my grades, my friendships, my relationship with my grandmother. I participated in activities that genuinely interested me, the debate team, the literary magazine, the environmental club, rather than those designed to impress others. My family watched my steady progress with varying degrees of confusion. My father, never particularly attentive, continued in his familiar patterns. I accepted his limitations and expected nothing more. Vivian and I developed a cautious equilibrium. Not close, but no longer estranged. She had grown into a thoughtful teenager, less certain of her own superiority than she had been as a child, occasionally seeking me out for conversations that surprised us both. And my mother, who had spent years trying to regain the control she had lost, eventually arrived at something like acceptance. She would never understand me, would never love me the way I had once craved, but she could no longer dismiss me either. I had become undeniable, a fixed point in the family constellation that could not be ignored or erased. The true reckoning came the winter I was 17. My grandmother had been ill for months, a decline so gradual it had seemed almost natural until suddenly it wasn't. I spent every free moment at her house, reading to her, holding her hand, absorbing whatever time we had left. My mother did not visit. She sent flowers, made occasional phone calls, but the complicated relationship between them had never resolved, and now it never would. She won't come, my grandmother said one afternoon, her voice thin and tired. She's afraid of death, of regret, of facing what she's done. I know. Promise me something, Helena. Anything. When I'm gone, don't let this family consume you. You have so much ahead of you, so much life, so much possibility. Don't waste it on people who don't deserve your gifts. I squeezed her hand gently. I promise. She smiled, and for a moment she looked like the woman I remembered from my first life, vital and strong and full of fierce love. You were always my favourite, you know. Don't tell the others. I laughed through my tears. Your secret is safe with me. She died 2 weeks later, peacefully, in her sleep. I was at her bedside, having stayed the night at her nurse's suggestion. I held her hand as her breathing slowed, as the space between each exhale stretched longer and longer, until finally there was silence. I sat with her for a long time afterward, in the quiet of the morning, saying goodbye. The funeral was small, attended mostly by neighbours and family friends. My parents came, my father sombre and distracted, my mother rigid with something I could not name. Vivian stood beside me, her hand finding mine and holding tight. Afterward, the lawyer read the will. My grandmother had left the bulk of her estate to various charities, but she had made specific provisions for her grandchildren. Vivian received her jewellery collection, a beautiful assemblage of vintage pieces that had been in the family for generations. I received the house. The silence that followed that announcement was absolute. My mother's face went white, then red. My father blinked slowly, processing. Vivian looked at me with something like, oh. That's not... My mother began. She can't. The will is legally binding, the lawyer said calmly. Mrs. Aldridge was very clear about her wishes. I did not react. I did not gloat or celebrate, or even smile. I simply nodded, accepting the gift my grandmother had given me. Freedom. My mother did not speak to me for 3 weeks after the funeral. When she finally broke her silence, it was to demand that I sign the house over to her. It should have been mine, she said, her voice shaking with fury. I'm her daughter. I should have inherited. You should have visited her, I replied. You should have called. You should have shown her the smallest fraction of the love she showed you. But you didn't, and now it's too late. You manipulated her. You turned her against me. No, you did that yourself years ago, long before I ever understood what was happening. I stood from the table where we had been sitting, the conversation clearly over. The house is mine, legally and morally. I'm not signing anything. I walked away, leaving my mother alone with her anger and her regret. I sold the house after graduation, using the money to pay for college without any financial ties to my family. I chose a university across the country, far from the complicated dynamics that had shaped my childhood. I studied literature and environmental science, subjects I genuinely loved, and I built a life that was entirely my own. My family became peripheral, occasional contacts rather than central figures. I sent cards on holidays, made brief phone calls on birthdays, attended the major events politeness required. But I never again allowed them to define my happiness or measure my worth. Vivian and I grew closer over the years. She had matured into someone thoughtful and self-aware, capable of seeing our family's dysfunction with clearer eyes than our parents ever would. She apologised multiple times for the role she had unknowingly played in my childhood neglect. I accepted her apologies and offered genuine forgiveness. She had been a child, as powerless in her way as I had been in mine. Our parents aged. My father's distraction mellowed into a kind of gentle bewilderment. He never quite understood what had gone wrong in his family, but he lacked the will to examine it closely. My mother's sharp edges dulled into a persistent dissatisfaction, a sense that life had not given her what she deserved, that others had taken what should have been hers. She never apologised. She never acknowledged the harm she had done. But she watched me, in those rare visits, with an expression I eventually learned to read. Confusion, yes, and resentment, but underneath it something else. Something like recognition. I had become everything she had tried to prevent. Independent, accomplished, content. I had built a life she could not touch or claim, and in doing so, I had proven that her approval had never been necessary for my survival. That recognition was its own kind of justice. I was 28 when I returned to Willowbrook for the first time in years. A former classmate was getting married, and I had promised to attend. The weekend would be brief, and I had no intention of visiting my family, but something drew me to the old library on my first evening in town. It looked smaller than I remembered. The oak doors that had seemed so imposing were simply doors now, the bench where I had waited simply a bench. I sat down, feeling the cold wood beneath me, and let the memories wash over. I had died here, in my first life. Died of neglect and exposure and the accumulated weight of a childhood spent waiting for love that never came. I had been given a miracle, a second chance, and I had used it to build something real. The door opened behind me, and I turned to see the librarian emerge, not the silver-haired woman from my childhood, but someone new, younger, with a warm smile and an armful of books. "We're closing in a few minutes," she said. "Can I help you find anything?" "No, thank you. I was just remembering." She nodded, as if this were a perfectly normal thing to do outside a library at dusk. "Good memories?" I considered the question. "Complicated ones, but they led somewhere good." "Most memories do, eventually." She smiled again and disappeared back inside. I sat for a few more minutes, breathing the autumn air, feeling the chill against my skin. Then I stood, wrapped my coat, my own coat, one I had bought for myself with money I had earned, more tightly around me and began to walk. Not to my parents' house. Not to any place that held claims on my past. I walked to the small bed and breakfast where I was staying, where a warm room and a good book waited for me. I walked into my future, one step at a time, leaving the ghosts of my childhood behind. The wedding was lovely. My old classmate had grown into a kind and happy woman, surrounded by people who clearly loved her. I danced, I laughed, I reconnected with friends I had not seen in years. And when the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, I found myself standing on the veranda of the reception hall, looking out at the stars. Vivian found me there. She had been at the wedding too, a connection to our shared past that I had welcomed rather than dreaded. "Beautiful night," she said, coming to stand beside me. "It is. Mum asked about you, wanted to know if you were coming to visit." "I'm not." Vivian nodded slowly. "She's different now, you know, softer. Dad's health has been declining and I think it's made her reflective. I hope that brings her some peace." "You don't want to see her?" I turned to look at my sister, this woman who had grown from the child who wore my coat to the Playdate into someone I genuinely respected and cared for. "I've made my peace with her, Vivian. That doesn't mean I need to be in her life." "I understand." She reached out and squeezed my hand. "I'm glad you came this weekend. It's good to see you." "It's good to see you too." We stood together in comfortable silence. Two sisters who had found their way to each other, despite the forces that had tried to keep them apart. And when the stars began to fade and the night grew cold, we walked back inside, back to the warmth and light of our separate lives. I flew home the next day. My apartment was small but comfortable, filled with books and plants and the quiet evidence of a life well lived. I made tea, sat by my window, and watched the city below move through its endless rhythms. I thought about my grandmother, about the summers we had spent together, about the wisdom she had offered so freely. I thought about the girl I had been at 12, sitting on that cold bench, waiting for people who never came. I thought about the woman I had become, forged in pain, but tempered by choice, carrying scars, but no longer bleeding from them. I had been given a second chance. I had used it to save myself, and in the quiet of my home, surrounded by the life I had built with my own hands and heart, I felt something I had rarely experienced in either of my lives, pure, uncomplicated gratitude. Not for my family, not for the circumstances that had shaped me, but for myself, for the choices I had made, for the courage it had taken to stop waiting and start walking. The cold November night, the closing library, the phone call no one answered, they were part of my story, indelible and unchangeable. But they were not the end of my story. They were the beginning of something new, something I had written for myself one word at a time, and the story was still being written. Every day, every choice, every small act of self-respect and self-love added another sentence, another paragraph, another chapter. The ending was not yet determined. But whatever came, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never again wait outside in the cold, hoping someone would remember to come for me. I would walk home on my own terms, under my own power, in the warmth of my own choosing. And that, in the end, was the only victory that mattered.